Now, whether I love or hate a game, there's one thing that I can't deny. Whether it's the actual game itself or the trailer, there are some fantastic soundtracks in video games these days, and actually ones from quite a few years back. You see it a lot more in trailers because obviously they're trying to build up the hype. They want to get you interested. And actually, this can apply to trailers in general. The best way to get people hyped, make it interesting. The right scenes, the right amount of action, the right selection of visual cues lined up with the right sound makes all the difference in the world. And you got a great soundtrack to go along with it? Even better. The Suicide Squad trailer was a perfect example of that. You had Queen mixed with the action scenes. Perfect. But we're talking about games here. And there are so many games, I actually had to make a very short list to compile the ones that had the biggest impact on me. And for this, I was thinking about games where either the entire soundtrack was awesome, there was one particular song that I liked, or it was the trailer for the game and not actually the game itself that introduced me to the artist or the music. But in either way, video games had a hand in introducing me and opening my mind to an aspect of music that I hadn't considered before or a band I didn't know about. The one that comes right out the gate to me is the Grand Theft Auto series. They've always had great soundtracks on their radio stations. In particular, though, I have to focus on Vice City. Vice City is one of my favorite Grand Theft Auto games of all time. In fact, no. It's my favorite in the entire GTA series. 5 is fantastic, and I really like GTA 3 and San Andreas, but Vice City holds a special place in my heart. I loved the colors, the characters, and the soundtrack. The 80s soundtrack they picked was just incredible and introduced me to a lot of bands. I mean, I'm a child of the 90s. The 80s was before my time, but it introduced me to a lot of music that would come to be favorites. I'd heard of a couple like, The Cult or Flock of Seagulls, one-hit wonders, different things like that, but there were so many songs and bands that would just become favorites of mine that I would never have known about had I not played the Grand Theft Auto series. So for all the negative media coverage that a Grand Theft Auto game may get, there should be a hat tip towards it introducing people to music they may not otherwise listen to, which is a point I will touch on at the end of this in a different way. Second one up is, anyone who's played Borderlands knows this. It's in the game and it was in the trailer. I had never heard of Cage the Elephant before, but Borderlands introduced me to them, and I really like the band in general. But again, I never would have known about them had it not been for Borderlands. The difference in the Borderlands 2 or Borderlands pre-sequel, the pre-sequel, was I already knew about The Heavy, but plenty of my friends had never heard of that band before. So the song Short Change Hero, which I believe was used, I think primarily in the pre-sequel, but I think it was in 2 as well, that introduced a lot of people I know to The Heavy. And whether they kept listening to them or not, it was a great accompaniment to the game. So once again, these are people who, I'd say my social circle has a pretty eclectic taste when it comes to music, but there's certain things you just wouldn't go out of your way to listen to, not because you don't like them, but because you don't even know they're there. And because of a game trailer or because of a game itself, you're exposed to it, and now your horizons have been broadened just a little bit more. And who knows what that might lead to? The possibilities are endless. One of my favorites for in terms of an emotional punch, there's actually two. The first one I have to mention because Red Dead Revolver is by far one of my favorite games. I want to say it would be my number one, but I would actually have to sit down and make a very dedicated list to be 100% sure. It's definitely in my top 2. I can be certain about that. I'm just not sure about the number 1 spot. But the song Dead Man's Gun by, I think it was Ashtar Command, is the song at the end of the game. And in the wake of everything that's happened in the story of John Marston, and the culmination of all of his efforts, and the conclusion of the tale of Red Dead Redemption, Dead Man's Gun plays, and it is the perfect, somber tribute to the story and the characters at the end of this journey, to the point that I would be very surprised if you're playing through the game for the first time anyway. The second time you may be a little numb to certain emotional cues. But if it's your first time, if you're enjoying the hell out of the experience, and if you're not a robot, that should bring some tears to your eyes, because it is just a beautiful accompaniment to what I think is the most complete video game I've ever played. I can say that much. It may not be number one. I can't say that with 100% certainty, but is definitely the most complete game I have ever played in my life to date. We'll see how the sequel/prequel stacks up. Curious about that. The next one, this is more for just the trailer because it got me interested. I'd heard of Cyberpunk before, but Cyberpunk's 2077, I guess, teaser trailer, because the game isn't really finished yet, and it was, hold on, let me see. It was Bullets by Archive, I think. And again, this was a band and a song I had never heard of or heard before. But the accompaniment with the visuals that you were shown in that trailer worked perfectly together. They were great. And even though it wasn't gameplay, it was, for the most part, still imagery, except for like a few brief cinematic sequences, and it was short. It introduced me to a band I may never have heard otherwise. And I'm glad, because I will say, if you're ever looking for some creative fuel, like whether you're drawing or writing or just thinking over something, maybe you like to listen to music while you read, I find Archive good for that. You may disagree, depending on your musical taste, but it puts me in a good creative flow. And maybe it'll do the same for you. Hopefully some of these bands. Of all of them, I would say, outside of the games I'm referencing, the entire GTA Vice City soundtrack is good to listen to because it's great 80s music, and The Heavy in general is just an awesome band, so I would highly recommend checking them out if you haven't, or if you've never heard of them before. Well worth your time. And to put a cap on this thought, rambling, rant, it's a little bit of everything, I suppose, that's where I come from when I say, whether I love or hate a game, I can never really fault it if it introduces people, in terms of music, and who knows, maybe in terms of the ideas it shares too. Because I like a film, no one ever sets out to make a bad game. I hope not. I mean, sometimes, yes, they do. But, if you're trying to make a game, if you are a studio making a game, you don't want to make a bad one. You want to make a good one, because if you make a bad one, who's going to buy the next one, right? Either way, win, lose, or draw, sometimes introducing people to music that they never would have otherwise heard before, or ideas, is just as good. And it's something that I'll touch on next, which is whether or not a game can be justified in being considered a good game if the mechanics are bad but the story is excellent. And one final note, because this is something that I've thought of quite a bit as well in terms of music and introducing people to genres they wouldn't normally listen to or know about. For a very long time, I really didn't like Family Guy. And it's only over the last, I want to say 2 years, that I've really come to enjoy it in a lot of ways. I think part of it was everybody had hyped it up for me. So it's one of those things where it's like everyone's talking about it, so you automatically don't like it just because you're like, everyone's talking about this. Even though it's been around for a while. But the one thing I can always admire, whether I like the show or not, is how Seth MacFarlane has introduced a generation of people, young and old, to music that they might not have otherwise listened to or known about, particularly the greats like, Frank Sinatra, of course. There's plenty of that sprinkled in there. There's lots of show tunes, bits from great musicals, other great names like Dean Martin. Oh, geez, I'm trying to remember other people from the Rat Pack, and they're escaping me right now. But like that style. Bobby Darin, I guess, would be another one. But these are artists and genres of music and great musical pieces from cinematic history adapted into a comedic format or straight up lifted and put into the show that may not have been listened to by that particular audience and demographic or given the time of day outside of Family Guy. And I find that pretty incredible that there is an entire generation of people who will grow up having heard this music, and it may even have become some of their favorites. And none of that would have happened if Family Guy didn't exist. And you can see how that correlation ties in with video games in the same way, and trailers, and the whole thesis behind this episode, in that there's so many great pieces of music that get a breath of fresh air and get revitalized, or in some cases resurrected, by something as simple as a cartoon, a video game, a trailer, or even being played in the background of a show. And that's what I think is so amazing about the joining of visuals and sound, and in the case of video games, the interactive element that ties it all together and makes those memories and that experience that much more rich and fulfilling, at least in my opinion. Of course, if you guys have your own thoughts, or hey, if you have some suggestions on music you've heard in games that was awesome, but that you probably wouldn't have heard anywhere else, or just great music in general, I'm always looking for that. Please feel free to share in the comments below, because I would be super interested to see and listen to your recommendations. And for the next one, like I said, I want to at least discuss my thoughts on whether a game can excuse maybe not bad game mechanics, but less than stellar game mechanics if it is accompanied by an amazing story. So until next time, my name's Rye. You guys take care of yourselves.